What happens when two of television's most outspoken personalities collide in a moment nobody saw coming? The View's latest episode turned into an absolute spectacle when Joy Behar found herself on the receiving end of a confrontation that left the entire studio speechless. Jane Fonda, known for her decades of activism and never backing down from controversy, walked onto that stage with something clearly on her mind. And what unfolded next was a masterclass in tension, awkward silences, and verbal jabs that cut deeper than anyone expected. This wasn't your typical celebrity interview. This was raw, unfiltered, and brutally honest. Before we dive into exactly what was said, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on in this clash. Because trust me, you're going to have an opinion. Now, let's get into what really went down. The morning started like any other episode of The View. The cameras were rolling. The audience was buzzing with anticipation, and the panel was ready to discuss the day's hot topics. Joy Behar sat in her usual spot, coffee in hand, that signature smirk playing at the corners of her mouth as she prepared to deliver her trademark wit and commentary. The producers had announced that Jane Fonda would be joining them as a guest, and everyone expected the usual promotional interview, a new project to discuss, some light banter about activism, maybe a few laughs about old Hollywood stories. But the energy shifted the moment Jane walked onto that stage. There was something different in her demeanor. Jane Fonda has always carried herself with a certain gravitas, but today there was an edge, a sharpness to her presence that immediately caught everyone's attention. She greeted the other hosts warmly enough. Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah, and the rest of the panel. But when she got to Joy, there was a pause, not long enough to be obvious to the casual viewer, but just enough that those paying close attention could sense something brewing beneath the surface. They exchanged pleasantries, took their seats, and the interview began. Joy, ever the comedian, started with what she thought was a harmless joke. She made a quip about Jane's latest activism work, something along the lines of how Jane always seemed to be fighting some cause or another, never taking a break from being the conscience of America. The studio audience chuckled. A few light laughs rippled through the room. It was classic Joy Behar humor, slightly sarcastic, but delivered with enough charm that it usually lands without offense. But Jane didn't laugh. Instead, she turned to look at Joy with an expression that can only be described as piercing. The silence that followed was deafening. You could feel the producers in the control room probably holding their breath, wondering if they should cut to commercial. But Jane wasn't done. She leaned forward slightly, her hands folded neatly on the table, and said something that stopped everyone cold. She told Joy that perhaps if more people took their responsibilities as seriously as she took her activism, the world wouldn't be in the state it's in. The way she said it wasn't loud or aggressive, but it was direct, pointed, and it landed like a hammer. Joy's smile faltered. You could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out if this was playful banter or if Jane was being serious. The other hosts exchanged quick glances, unsure whether to jump in or let this play out. Joy, never one to back down from a challenge, tried to laugh it off. She said something about how she's been doing her part for years, using her platform to speak truth to power, fighting the good fight on television every single day. But Jane wasn't having it. What came next was a dissection of Joy's career that nobody expected. Jane, with her decades of experience in both Hollywood and activism, began to question the substance behind Joy's commentary. She asked Joy point blank, when was the last time she actually did something beyond talking? When was the last time she put herself on the line, faced real consequences, made real sacrifices for the causes she claims to care about so deeply? The way Jane phrased it wasn't mean-spirited, but it was challenging. It demanded an answer. And Joy clearly wasn't prepared. The audience had gone completely silent now. This wasn't the fun, light-hearted clash of opinions that The View is known for. This was something deeper, more personal, and far more uncomfortable to watch. Joy tried to pivot, bringing up her comedy background, suggesting that humor is its own form of activism, that making people laugh while making them think is valuable work. But Jane cut through that argument with surgical precision. She told Joy that humor without action is just entertainment, and while entertainment has its place, it shouldn't be confused with real change. Jane brought up her own history, the risks she took during the Vietnam War, the way she was blacklisted, threatened, vilified by the government and the media. She talked about getting arrested for protesting climate change, about using her celebrity not just to talk, but to actually mobilize people, organize movements, create tangible results. And then she looked at Joy and asked her, "What have you risked?" Joy's face had changed completely by this point. The playful comedian was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely rattled. She tried to defend herself, pointing to her years on television, the politicians she's interviewed, the uncomfortable truths she's spoken. But with each word, it became clearer that Jane had touched a nerve. Exposed something that Joy perhaps hadn't fully confronted herself. The difference between commentary and action. Between talking about change and actually being an agent of change, Whoopi tried to step in, attempting to steer the conversation back to safer ground, asking Jane about her upcoming projects. But Jane wasn't ready to let go just yet. She turned to Whoopi and acknowledged that yes, they'd get to that. But she wanted to finish this point because she felt it was important. She said that to many people in media, in entertainment, have confused visibility with effectiveness. They think because they have a platform and they use it to express opinions, they're making a difference. But Jane argued that real activism requires more than just words. It requires vulnerability, sacrifice, and the willingness to face real consequences. The camera kept cutting back to Joy, and you could see her struggling. She's known for being quick on her feet, for having a comeback ready, for never being at a loss for words. But in this moment, she was clearly searching, trying to find a way to respond that wouldn't come across as defensive, while also not conceding Jane's point entirely. She finally said that not everyone can be Jane Fonda, that not everyone has the privilege or the platform to do the kind of activism Jane has done. And that's when Jane delivered perhaps the most devastating line of the entire exchange. Jane told Joy that it's interesting she would use the word privilege because they both have enormous privilege. They both have platforms, resources, fame, and access that most people could only dream of. So if anyone should be doing more than just talking, it's people exactly like them. She said that hiding behind the excuse of not having enough privilege while sitting on a nationally televised talk show is, and she paused here, for effect, a choice. A comfortable choice, but a choice nonetheless. The weight of that statement hung in the air. Sarah N. looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. The audience was so quiet, you could hear the cameras worry. And Joy, for one of the rare times in her career, seemed genuinely at a loss. She nodded slowly, pursed her lips, and said something about how she appreciates Jane's perspective, even if she doesn't entirely agree with it. But you could tell, everyone watching could tell, that something had shifted. This wasn't just a disagreement about politics or activism. This was a moment of genuine confrontation about purpose, legacy, and what it means to actually stand for something. Jane softened slightly, perhaps sensing she'd made her point. She told Joy that she respects her work, that comedy and commentary have value, but she wanted Joy to really think about what more she could be doing, not for Jane's sake, but for Joy's own sense of fulfillment and impact. It was almost maternal in a way. Tough love from someone who's been through the wars and come out the other side with her convictions intact. But the damage, if you want to call it that, was already done. Joy had been challenged in a way that you rarely see on daytime television, and she had no easy answer. The tension in the studio was still palpable as the conversation continued. Joy took a sip of her coffee, clearly using the moment to compose herself, to figure out her next move. You could see her trying to regain her footing, to steer this back into territory where she felt more in control. She looked at Jane and said that while she appreciates being challenged, she thinks Jane might be oversimplifying what it means to use a platform like The View. She argued that reaching millions of people every day, shaping conversations, influencing how people think about important issues, that is a form of activism in itself. Jane listened, her expression neutral, giving Joy the space to make her case. And Joy continued, gaining a bit of momentum now. She talked about how not everyone is built for the kind of activism Jane does, how some people's strengths lie in communication, in breaking down complex issues for everyday Americans who might not otherwise engage with politics or social justice. She said that dismissing that work as mere entertainment is unfair, and frankly, a bit elitist. It was a solid counter-argument, one that made some of the other hosts nod in agreement, and for a moment it seemed like Joy might be able to turn this around. But Jane wasn't convinced. She acknowledged Joy's point about reaching people, about the power of media and communication, She said those things are absolutely valuable, necessary even. But then she asked Joy a question that cut right to the heart of the matter. She asked, when you turn off the cameras, when you go home at the end of the day, what are you doing? Are you organizing? Are you fundraising? Are you mentoring young activists? Are you using your connections and your resources to build something lasting? Or are you just waiting for the next show to air so you can talk about the issues again? Joy's expression tightened. You could see the frustration building now, the feeling of being cornered, of being judged by someone she probably expected to be an ally. She shot back that Jane doesn't know what she does in her private time, that not everything has to be performative, that maybe she does more than Jane gives her credit for, but doesn't feel the need to broadcast it to the world. It was a fair point, and for a moment, the audience seemed to shift slightly in Joy's favor. A few people nodding along. Jane smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who's heard that defense before and knows exactly how to respond to it. She told Joy that if she's doing all these things behind the scenes, then she apologizes for the assumption. But she added that, in her experience, people who are truly committed to the work don't tend to be shy about it. Not because they're seeking praise, but because part of activism is inspiring others, showing them what's possible. She said that secrecy in activism is often just another word for inaction, dressed up as humility. You could see it on Joy's face, the way her jaw clenched, the way her hands gripped the edge of the table just a little tighter. The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. Whoopi jumped in again, trying to lighten the mood, making a joke about how they're all just trying to do their best in a complicated world. But the damage was done. The conversation had gone to a place that couldn't easily be walked back. Jane had essentially accused Joy of performative activism, of being all talk and no action, and she'd done it in front of millions of viewers. Joy tried one more approach. She brought up Jane's controversial past, specifically the Vietnam War era and the backlash Jane faced, the way she was called names, threatened, ostracized. Joy said that while she admires Jane's courage, not everyone is willing or able to endure that kind of public vilification. Some people have families to think about, careers that could be destroyed, lives that could be upended. She suggested that Jane's privilege, ironically, was that she could afford to take those risks because she was already established, already had nothing left to lose. It was a bold move, essentially turning Jane's criticism back on her, questioning whether Jane's activism was brave or simply the luxury of someone who had already made it. The audience reacted with a mix of gasps and murmurs. This was getting personal now, moving beyond political disagreement into something that felt almost like a personal attack. The other hosts looked genuinely concerned, wondering if this had gone too far, if they needed to step in and end this before it became something that would dominate headlines for all the wrong reasons. But Jane didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed energized by Joy's pushback. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and told Joy that she's absolutely right. She did have privilege. She did have a safety net that most activists don't have. But she used that privilege. She leveraged it for something beyond her own comfort and success. She said that the question isn't whether you have privilege, it's what you do with it. And she looked at Joy and said, "You have that same privilege, so what are you doing with it? Are you using it to protect yourself, to maintain your comfortable position? Or are you willing to risk something for the things you claim to believe in?" Joy opened her mouth to respond, but for a moment, nothing came out. It was stunning to watch. Joy Behar, known for never being at a loss for words, genuinely struggling to formulate a response. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, less confident, more defensive. She said that she resents the implication that she hasn't done enough, that her decades of work in television, speaking truth to power, challenging politicians, and holding them accountable, counts for nothing just because it doesn't look like Jane's version of activism. Jane shook her head, and you could see a flash of something in her eyes, maybe frustration, maybe disappointment. She told Joy that she never said it counts for nothing. She said it's not enough. There's a difference. She said that Joy's work has value, but in a moment when democracy is under threat, when climate change is accelerating, when inequality is skyrocketing, doing the bare minimum from a position of safety isn't something to be proud of. It's something to be ashamed of. She said that history will judge all of them, everyone with a platform and resources, not by what they said, but by what they did, by the risks they took, by the sacrifices they made. The studio had become almost unbearably tense. Sarah N. tried to interject with a question about Jane's upcoming projects, clearly desperate to change the subject. But Jane held up a hand politely and said she'd get to that, but she wanted to finish this thought. She turned back to Joy, and her voice softened just slightly. She said that she's not attacking Joy personally, she's challenging her, and there's a difference. She said she sees potential in Joy in all of them, to do more, to be more than just commentators and entertainers. She said that the world needs them to step up, and she's simply asking if they're willing to do it. Joy looked at her, and for a moment you could see something shift in her expression. Maybe it was consideration, maybe it was resentment, maybe it was a bit of both. She said that Jane has given her a lot to think about, but she also thinks Jane is being unfair in her assessment. She said that not all activism looks the same, that reaching people where they are, making them laugh while making them think, bringing important conversations into living rooms across America, that has value even if it doesn't involve getting arrested or being blacklisted. She said that Jane's way isn't the only way, and maybe Jane needs to expand her definition of what meaningful activism looks like in the modern media landscape. It was a solid rebuttal, probably the strongest one Joy had managed so far, and Jane seemed to acknowledge it, nodding slowly, considering the point. She told Joy that she's absolutely right. Activism takes many forms, and she doesn't mean to suggest there's only one valid approach. But then she added that there's a difference between different forms of activism and different levels of commitment. She said that she worries too many people, in positions of power and influence, have chosen the path of least resistance. The activism that feels good but doesn't require real sacrifice, doesn't create real discomfort, doesn't truly threaten the status quo. Joy countered that she's been plenty uncomfortable over the years, that she's been criticized, attacked, called names, threatened even. She said that just because she's not getting arrested doesn't mean she's not facing consequences for her beliefs. Jane acknowledged that's true, that public criticism is a form of consequence. But then she asked Joy if she's ever been scared, truly scared, that her activism might cost her everything. Has she ever had to choose between her principles and her career? Between doing what's right and protecting her livelihood? Between speaking truth and maintaining relationships with powerful people? The question hung in the air, heavy and challenging. Joy looked at Jane for a long moment, and you could see her weighing her response, trying to decide if she should be honest or defensive. Finally, she said that she's been in situations where she's had to make difficult choices, where standing by her principles has created tension and pushback. But then she admitted, her voice quieter now, that no, she's probably never been in a position where she truly thought she might lose everything. And the moment she said it, you could see she wished she could take it back, because it was essentially admitting Jane's point. Jane didn't gloat, didn't press the advantage. Instead, she reached over and touched Joy's hand briefly, a gesture that was surprisingly gentle given the intensity of their exchange. She told Joy that there's no shame in that most people never face that kind of choice. But she said that the people who do face it, who make the harder choice, those are the ones who change the world. And she asked Joy if she wants to be remembered as someone who talked about change or someone who created it. Joy pulled her hand back slowly, not aggressively but deliberately, creating space between herself and Jane. She sat up straighter in her chair, and when she spoke again, there was something different in her tone, a mixture of defensiveness and genuine reflection that made the moment feel incredibly raw. She told Jane that it's easy to judge people from a position of moral superiority, to look down on those who haven't made the same choices you have and assume they're lesser for it. She said that Jane has had an extraordinary life, extraordinary courage, but not everyone is Jane Fonda, and that doesn't make them failures. Jane's expression remained steady, almost compassionate despite the harshness of her earlier words. She told Joy that she's not calling her a failure, she's calling her capable of more. She said there's a difference between judging someone and believing in their potential to rise to a moment that demands more than they've given so far. She said that Joy is smart, influential, and has the ear of millions of people, and that comes with responsibility, whether Joy wants to accept it or not. Joy shook her head, a bitter smile crossing her face. She said that responsibility is a convenient word people use when they want others to do what they think is right. She asked Jane who gets to decide what enough looks like, who gets to be the arbiter of whether someone's contribution matters. She said that Jane may have her definitions and her standards, But Joy has spent her entire career fighting in her own way, and she's tired of being told it's not good enough by people who think their way is the only way. Jane leaned forward again, her voice taking on an intensity that commanded attention. She told Joy that the planet is dying, that fascism is rising, that people are suffering in ways that demand urgent action, not just commentary. She said that when Joy's grandchildren ask her what she did during this critical time in history, will she be satisfied telling them she had a talk show where she made jokes and interviewed celebrities? Or will she wish she had done more, risked more, been more than just a voice in the chorus of people who saw the crisis coming but chose comfort over courage? The question landed like a physical blow. Joy's face flushed, and for a moment she looked like she might actually cry, though whether from anger or genuine emotion was impossible to tell. She told Jane that she doesn't need to be lectured about legacy, that she's very aware of what she's built and what she's contributed. She said that Jane's tactics might work on younger activists who idolize her, but Joy has been around long enough to recognize self-righteousness when she sees it. She said that maybe Jane should spend less time criticizing allies and more time building bridges instead of burning them. Jane's response was calm but firm. She said that she doesn't want enemies, she wants accomplices. She said that being an ally means showing up, taking risks, doing the uncomfortable work, not just agreeing with the right positions from a safe distance. She told Joy that if her criticism feels harsh, it's because the stakes are too high for politeness, too urgent for ego management. She said that she'd rather push someone who has the capacity to do more than waste time comforting them in their complacency. The other hosts had essentially given up trying to redirect the conversation. They sat watching this battle of wills play out, occasionally exchanging glances, but mostly just bearing witness to something that felt historic in its intensity. Whoopi finally spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of someone trying to find middle ground. She said that both Joy and Jane have valid points, that the conversation about what activism means and what's expected of people with platforms is ongoing and complicated. But Jane cut her off, not rudely, but decisively. She said that, actually, it's not that complicated. Either you believe the crisis we're facing requires sacrifice and action, or you don't. Either you're willing to risk something real for the causes you claim to support, or you're not. She said that nuance is important in many things, but not in the question of whether to fight for survival, for justice, for a livable future. That question demands a yes or no, and anything less than yes is ultimately a no dressed up in sophisticated language. Joy stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor, creating a jarring sound that made everyone jump slightly. She looked at Jane with an expression that was hard to read. Anger mixed with something else, maybe respect, maybe hurt. She told Jane that she's given her a lot to think about, probably more than she wanted. She said that she doesn't agree with Jane's assessment of her life and work, but she can't deny that Jane's words have affected her. She said that maybe that was Jane's goal all along, to make her uncomfortable, to make everyone uncomfortable, because comfort is the enemy of change. Jane stood as well, and the two women faced each other across the table. Jane told Joy that discomfort is exactly the point. She said that every social movement in history has been driven by people who were willing to be uncomfortable, to make others uncomfortable, to refuse to accept the unacceptable. She said that Joy has a choice to make, they all do, about who they want to be in this moment. She said that she hopes Joy chooses courage over comfort, action over commentary, because the world needs her to be more than she's been. Joy nodded slowly, and then, in a moment that surprised everyone, she extended her hand to Jane. Jane took it, and they shook, a gesture that felt less like reconciliation and more like mutual acknowledgement of a battle fought. Joy told Jane that she hears her, even if she doesn't have all the answers right now. She said that maybe Jane is right, maybe she has been too comfortable, too safe in her role. She said that she doesn't know what comes next, but this conversation has cracked something open that can't easily be closed again. The audience finally broke their silence with hesitant applause, unsure if they'd just witnessed a fight or a breakthrough or something in between. The cameras kept rolling as the show moved toward its conclusion, but the energy had fundamentally changed. Something real had happened, something that couldn't be scripted or packaged neatly. Two powerful women had confronted each other about purpose, legacy, and what it means to truly stand for something, and neither had walked away unscathed. So what do you think? Was Jane Fonda right to push Joy Behar so hard, or did she cross a line? Is there a difference between commentary and real activism, or are they both valuable in their own ways? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe because conversations like this are exactly what we need more of. Tell us, what would you have said if you were in Joy's position?